Hello! Welcome to the first episode breakdown for my Teen Romantic Parody SNAFU. I am Haven. You may recognize my voice as the voice of Yukino, but I also edited this episode. Let's jump right into things here. The episode had 4 scenes, which isn't very many for a 10-minute episode, but those were some packed 4 scenes. So what you see right now is what the end product looks like before I export it, but let me show you what these 4 scenes look like unpacked on one timeline. Yeah, this big monstrosity here is what all of the editing for the episode looks like. Going right to scene 1, there wasn't anything too special in this scene. It was your typical mouth flaps, really, but I also added movement here to Hachimon's eyes because there was no shot of Shizuka getting up. I wanted some form of visual representation of her beginning to stand. So that just required going to Photoshop, removing his eyes from the layer, coloring the spot it left behind, and then saving them as PNGs to put into Premiere as their own layers. In scene 2, I started off with this Get Out sign, written by Yukino. I took the original shot, which actually was already a blank room plate, but I wasn't sure if I should put it on paper or on the board. I figured the paper would make most sense. I also decided this font and color specifically was what would represent Yukino's handwriting from there on out, just because it's fancy and harsh and kind of pretentious, just like she is. So I made the sign in Photoshop, then put it in Premiere, and added motion for it to move with the establishing shot here. Next we have these flaps for Shizuka. They didn't exist before, so I drew them in Photoshop, added the appropriate amount of blur so that it would match how out of focus she is in this shot, and put them in. Then we have Shizuka's mouth flaps here. These are simple motion shots. A lot of the time shows don't have this 1-1-1 animation, and it can oftentimes be 2-2-3, which requires being a bit more meticulous, but SNAFU made my life easy, so I could put in simple motion tracking. Over here we have a shot of Hachimon. He didn't originally have any flaps here, so these are custom drawn mouth flaps as well. So there are 2 shots that I use this technique on in this episode, but I cannot for the life of me remember where the second one is. I mentioned before using the same shot that the original shot had motion, but I decided I wanted to make this shot a still. But I also wanted to keep the animation of Shizuka turning, so I cut her out of the motion frames and used the room around her as guiding markers to make sure I could keep the animation in place while also turning the motion shot into a still shot. Scene 3 opens with the shot of the clock here. The clock originally was positioned in this way, but there were no shots with the time moved forward. So I took the shot of the clock, put it into Photoshop, replicated the hands, moved them along in time with the clock, and also replicated the shading and glare on the clock to make it all blend in. This shot here has another simple eye animation on Hachimon. It's small and subtle, so I'm not even sure how many people caught it, but I felt it would better the situation of the scene either which way. Hoo boy! Okay, so we're at adult supervision. This shot was a lot of fun. Ethan, or She Wants the EG, the writer, director, producer, whatever you want to call him, he is the guy in charge of these episodes, from writing to casting and all in between. He told me to go wild with this. He just said to add whatever I want to spice this shot up. And so I did. So we've got some lightning effects here, then at the bottom here, there's this flame that sweeps across the bottom of the screen. There's also a little flame in her eye, but as she passes by the screen, I put that flame into her finger, which is only mostly noticeable when she swipes her finger downwards. And then I just hammered on the appropriate sound effects for the situation. The shot directly after has smoke filling the room. This wasn't part of the script, but I had finished editing all those extra visual effects and thought, we can't possibly ignore all the fire that was just in this room. So I asked Ethan if we could get an extra line of the yoga club instructor, and that's how we established that they were over there in the next room, and fill this shot with smoke. I was super happy about the feedback from that shot, so thank you, and yay there! Then we have more custom lip flaps again, right here on Hachimon, next here on Shizuka, and some more over here on Hachimon again. And finally, for scene 4, we open up on the same kind of shot as scene 2, but now some time has passed and the Get Out sign has been taped over with the Volunteer Club sign. I made a last-second addition to this, adding the leave signed by Yukino at the bottom because of a line later in the scene where Hachimon says that the sign outside isn't very welcoming. With the get out sign taped over, that didn't make much sense to me because a regular volunteer club sign is perfectly fine, but the leave at the bottom added that touch of unwelcoming that it needed. The next shot that needed some attention were some moving flips on Yukino, and thank you so much, SNAFU, for having easy animation to work with for that. Next, we have Hachimon speaking here. He doesn't originally speak when he's looking to his left towards the girls, so what I had to do was take his flaps from his right side of his mouth, mirror flip them so I could have him speaking when he was facing the other way, and that way I could have him talking all through the animation for a more dynamic shot. So in this shot, his eyes are kind of wonky here. It's weird. The reason for that, well, I can't entirely say. I took the original shot of Hachimon from the show, and this is what his eyes were like, but I wanted to add motion to them. So I put it into Photoshop and traced over his eyes as accurately as possible, because I wanted it to be that if you put a side-by-side with the new shot in original, that you couldn't tell the difference. However, that meant keeping his wonky eyes. This is where he gets scared, so his eyes shrink in terror. Then we have this shot of the flyer here, which was originally this shot of Hachimon's homework that Shizuka was displeased with. I threw it into Photoshop and designed his student council flyer. Then I added some motion to the shot to make it not just look like a simple still image. The next shot is actually a reaction shot after Hachimon got punched in the stomach, but he looks smug enough like he was leaning over to get into her face without context, so I decided to use this shot for him when he's rubbing in his student council plan. Then back to present time, I finished things off with this shot by adding new custom lip flaps to add to his terrified expression, trying to make him smile and appear friendly out of pure fear. You may have noticed how many reused shots there were in this fourth scene. That's because this scene is about 30 to 45 seconds long in the original show and had to be extended to 2 to 3 minutes in the abridged. Unfortunately, they don't really go back to this room with this same setup wearing these same clothes for the rest of the series, so I couldn't even pull from later episodes. So I tried to use the many animations that Yui had in as many different ways as I possibly could to try and create new reactions. And yeah, that would be that for episode 1, and thus this breakdown. Thank you guys so much for the wonderful support that we've gotten so far on episode 1. It really was such a treat to work on. I'm super excited to continue working on this series. Hopefully we'll have some new news for you guys soon, so follow us on Twitter, like us, subscribe to us, do whatever the heck you want to do, or don't, because live your life, kids. Thank you guys very much for hanging out, and we will see you next time.